and welcome to the Gelatin Art Academy, Lesson 5. In this lesson, we will talk about how to assemble a larger cake using small gelatin art desserts. And we will cover different kinds of backgrounds you can use to finish your gelatin art cake. A great feature of gelatin is that it can be reheated and melted multiple times. This means that you can take 2 or more completely separate gelatin desserts and fuse them together using liquid gelatin. Here is how you would assemble a cake. Make several small gelatin art desserts and prepare fresh liquid gelatin. Pour a little bit of clear gelatin onto the dessert center hole to prevent the color from leaking into the cake. Leave it in the fridge for a few minutes to set. Take the small desserts out of their containers and place them onto plastic cling wrap. Cling wrap will prevent the desserts from sticking to the plate or tray they are on. To make a flat dessert, pour some liquid gelatin into the pan. Liquid gelatin should be warm to the touch, but not hot enough to melt the flowers. If the gelatin is too cold, the layers will separate easily when the dessert is finished. To keep the liquid gelatin warm, you may want to keep it in a larger container with warm water. This way, you don't need to reheat it again for each new layer. Arrange the flowers in the pan and leave them in the fridge until the bottom layer has set. It is best to fill the entire pan with flowers. This way, they will push against each other and keep themselves from falling apart. A few hours should be enough for the first layer to harden and hold the desserts in place. To create a second layer, pour more liquid gelatin into the container. Remove any air bubbles that form on the first layer and put the pan back in the fridge to set. When the second layer has set completely, you can draw additional shapes and leaves in the gaps between flowers. To release the cake from the container, run a toothpick alongside the edge of the cake first. Keep the container in warm water for a short while. Metal containers and baking pans will need only a few seconds to release gelatin. To make a dome-shaped cake, start by placing a little bit of liquid gelatin into a bowl. Place 1 small flower into it. Allow this first layer to set in the fridge before continuing. When the first layer has set, place a container on top of it and secure it tightly with tape. This container will hold the space for the cake filling later. It is very important to make it immobile and that the flowers cannot slide underneath it. Take the small desserts out of their containers and place them onto plastic cling wrap. Pour a little bit of liquid gelatin with each row. Check to see if there are any bubbles forming on the surface of the previous layer. If you see some, release them using a silicone spatula. Make the flowers wet with water before inserting them into the container. This will help them slide into place and prevent air bubbles from forming on the flower surface. Place the flowers in one by one and release all air bubbles trapped around them. Leave the bowl in the fridge again. The added gelatin doesn't need to be completely set between layers. It usually takes an hour or so in the fridge for it to solidify enough to keep the flowers in place. Keep adding rows until you have filled the entire bowl. When you fill the last row, leave the cake in the fridge for several hours to set completely. To remove the inner container, release its edges with a toothpick first. Fill the container with warm water. When you can spin it in place freely, remove some of the water from it and lift it out. Check to see if the color has leaked out of any of the flowers. If you see faint streaks of color, wipe them off with an absorbent napkin or a paper towel. If you have a lot of excess liquid gelatin in the center, scoop it up with a spoon. At this point, you can add baby's breath flowers or leaves in the gaps between flowers. If the flowers are reaching beyond the bowl edge, trim them carefully with a knife. After that, you are ready to fill the cake with delicious mousse. When the mousse sets, you can also use a melting tool to smooth out the edges. To release the cake from the container, run a toothpick alongside the edge of the cake first. Keep the container in warm water for a short while. Thick glass containers might take up to several minutes to warm up.
Be very careful when working with large glass containers. Gelatin is very heavy and slippery. Make sure you have a good grip on the glass bowl before you attempt to turn it upside down.
When the cake is out of the container, you can use a paper towel to scoop up the excess gelatin from the tray. One simple way to add a background to a gelatin art dessert is to add a few drops of color to the color base and pour it over the dessert. To add a bit more depth to the background, you can add a few drops of liquid color into clear gelatin and pour it over the dessert. The transparency of the gelatin will allow the light to come through and make a more interesting background for your flowers. Warm the gelatin up slightly before adding color. If gelatin is too cold, color will gather in clumps and not dissolve properly. This effect can also be accomplished by using fruit juice. Replace milk with fruit juice in the color-based recipe, and you'll have a delicious fruity background for your dessert. Use concentrated fruit juice and add sugar for best results. Another quick way to create a background is to dilute a bit of color in water and apply it to the back of your dessert. You can use a paper towel to scoop up the excess color. Pour some liquid gelatin to create a dark brown background for your dessert. Use a cocoa color base. You can find the recipe for the cocoa color base on our website. That's it for this lesson. Join us in our next lesson to find out how to make different kinds of mousse to complement your gelatin art desserts.